Hi, my name is Emily Rivera, and welcome to Giant Steps Press Go Zoom. Today, we have with us a GSP intern who is working on a book on the American identity of the undocumented Guyanese immigrants in Queens, New York, and how first-generation Americans are grappling with the complexities of their identity. Chelsea DeBarros, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the warm welcome that I've received from the Giant Steps Press team. I just signed my contract to have my book published by GSP, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with the team.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that GSP is of value to you. Can you tell us about how you started writing your book?
Yeah, so my interest in writing started in high school, where I could uh, relatively easily write a paper, draft and write a paper. However, I had the greatest change in my writing when I started college, and I received a C on my first college paper. And the assignment was for my writing composition one class. I had to interview a person in the class and then, just write about them. And I considered that project to be straightforward because it seems like you just talk to someone and write about their life. And that's what I did. I interviewed my partner and I wrote on her life, and then I confidently gave in the paper. Then I got a C, and I was shocked because in my head, I thought, this paper would be an A, for sure, an A in high school. So I read through the feedback from my professor furiously. I was flipping page after page. And then I started to understand the perspective of my professor and why he gave me the C. He wanted me to celebrate the person I was interviewing and not just state facts on them like we would do in high school. And I had to also lose the high school lingo of using words like always and never, because no one is ever always or never something. Like my partner in the project can't be always happy. It's just impossible. So you see, like when writing and the little details, such as the words that you use and how you're putting them together, putting together the information, it will impact a viewer's perception. And I wanted to get better at mastering the little details.
So how did you achieve your goal of getting better at mastering these little details?
Yeah, so I went to my college writing center for almost every paper that I had to complete. The tutors at the writing center helped me learn in-depth skills for writing, drafting, and editing that I wasn't fully exposed to in high school. And the time I spent in the writing center paid off because I never received a C again. And my professor that gave me the C, and now my mentor, Paul Gordon, he helped me find my writing voice, leading to the opportunity to publish my article on the Giant Steps Press blog. So finding my writing voice is empowering to me because I learned the value of persistence and hard work. I went from having a C in my first ever college paper to having a platform to inspire others with my writing.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely had a similar experience because I took the same class with Paul Gordon, and I realized the same thing of, you're telling a story, you're enriching them. You don't have to just stick to the format of the
Right.
intro, three body, and conclusion. So Paul helped me with that too. Um, but so once you had developed your no quit energy, that vibe, and your hard work ethic, what inspired you to dig into these topics of the undocumented Guyanese community and the identity complexities of first generation Americans that come with that and start writing a book?
So after I strengthened my writing voice, I wanted to bring my voice to the community that helped me. And this community is in Queens, and it's now called Little Guyana. Guyana is the country where my parents are from. It's the only English-speaking country in South America, and Guyanese individuals can trace their roots back to East India, Africa, Portugal, China, and there are Guyanese individuals who have indigenous ancestry. So as a first-generation American who works and lives in Little Guyana, I'm aware of the stigmas that exist in our community, specifically with being an undocumented immigrant. And I've heard throughout my life the ignorant and rude comments. For example, I remember one time being at a friend's house, and it was a time where we heard that ICE raids were happening on Liberty Avenue, and people were scared to go to work and to go shop. And the parent of my friend said, well, that's good for them, as in the undocumented Guyanese immigrants deserve to be rounded up and deported. And I've also heard arguments where one party threatens to report the other individual to ICE because, they're mad at them for some petty reason. So the intimidator would use the undocumented status of the other person as a way to exploit them. So, as an American citizen who was born in the US, I want to use my voice to help the undocumented community share their voice. And there has to be an awareness that those who are born in America or naturalized in the United States have a privilege in this country, and we hold the societal power to uplift those who don't have a voice.
That's amazing. Like how you're being an advocate for those who don't have a voice. Can you talk about the identity complexities that exist?
Yeah, so I'm aware of the identity complexities that exist in the first generation Guyanese community. There's a notion of Indo-Guyanese individuals having been twice removed, first from India to Guyana and then from Guyana to America. So when a person has roots in different places, it's hard to sift through all of that history because there can be pain and trauma that comes with learning about what your ancestors might have had to go through. And then you have to pick up these pieces and see how it impacts you as a person. In my experience, identity is a struggle, and I continue to navigate the path like the rest of us. I mainly remember one of my first awarenesses of the complexities of my identity starting in elementary school, where teachers and kids would ask me where my parents are from, or like, where am I from? Or sometimes teachers would double check to see if I am Chelsea DeBarros because the name didn't seem to match, what I look like. To say it plain, I have black hair, brown eyes, brown skin, and where does the last name DeBarros fit in? And as a child, I hated my name because it was a point of discussion, and I wanted to blend in and have an Indo-Caribbean last name like the rest of my friends. And I remember one specific day, I was around 7 years old, I came home and I just cried to my mom that I wanted to change my name. And, that's just how much it bothered me. And now that I'm older and I took the time to ask my parents questions and to learn about who I am, I love my name because my name holds a lot of strength and history. It's a product of my Indian and Portuguese ancestors who were brought to Guyana as indentured laborers to work in the sugar plantations. And learning about the history of my ancestors and their lives in Guyana is not an easy task, but it is worth it because I feel that I am able to learn more about who I am if I know about my ancestors from the two different countries, and if I know about the roots from my parents in Guyana. It's like a reconnection or an acknowledgement of who helped make me me. And it's important to remember that only a part of one's identity is their nationality. The other part is where we feel at home and where our roots are. And for first generation Americans like myself, coming to terms and learning about my ancestral past, in addition to knowing my parents' roots in Guyana, and combining that information with my American identity, it helps me develop my overall identity. It's kind of like a cake where all of the layers come together to, just form one grand thing.
Yeah, for sure. I totally understand your analogy and where the two identities overlap because I am Puerto Rican and an American. So I could totally relate to this idea of having like two separate parts of yourself. And for me, this struggle kind of extends to the community stating like, maybe I'm not Puerto Rican enough, or I'm not white enough, or I'm too white and or I'm too Puerto Rican. So it's kind of a weird complexity where you're right, your identity doesn't only lie on your nationalities and you can own who you are. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. First, I'm glad that you shared your experience with me. There's this really great podcast that I listened to with a collaboration between two creators, Caribbean Crossroads and The Cutlass, who can be found on Instagram under those same handles. And they discussed that identity lies on a spectrum. And in the end, they summarize that how you want to identify is up to you. There is no right or wrong answer. And matter of fact, there is no single term to encapsulate our complicated ancestral history. And as your story shows, the complexity in finding one's identity is a universal experience that continues throughout numerous generations. And your experience also highlights exactly what I'm getting at, that identity for first generation American and onward is never a straight path. And the identity discovery experience is an emotional roller coaster because we never seem to fit into one category. And that results in us having to be the ones to blaze our own trail.
yeah, for sure. Can you share with us how you took this struggle and used it to empower yourself?
Yeah, so since I knew I was struggling with finding out who I am in this world, I knew there must be others who were too. And I took my need to address the identity issues one might face by conducting interviews with undocumented members of the Guyanese community and their American children.
Okay. That's really inspiring how you're creating a platform for the Guyanese American community to discuss these complexities of identity. Can you please share what your research revealed and how does this work into your upcoming book?
Of course, the families I interviewed are a part of my ethnographical research. In meeting the families, I couldn't believe how the stories they told me were so much like the lessons I learned in the American history books, like self-reliance, independence, ingenuity, and fortitude. And this is the heart of the story. Undocumented Guyanese immigrants in the United States are American at the core of their identity. And these traits are all strengthened once more in the States. Also, from my time with these families and their American children, it's evident that first generation Americans with parents born in Guyana, those children are the creators of their own identity by creating and finding a balance between tradition and modernity. And I'm using my research to develop a nonfiction book about how the undocumented Guyanese immigrants in the United States are American at the core of their identity and the complexities one faces with their identity, especially first generation Americans.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you share the story that will be featured in the book?
Although each faces a different reason to immigrate, racial violence, job hazards, and an urge to travel the world, three young Guyanese accidentally meet up in New York, living under the radar as undocumented. They share their dangerous journeys, find a family in one another, learn to thrive despite the constant fear of deportation, and come to experience what it really means to live in the land of the free. To thicken the plot, two of the undocumented characters have an American daughter named Carly. And unlike her family, Carly goes through the American socialization process more in depth. You know, she goes to public school and she makes other American friends. And from this, Carly has a growing identity conflict that other members of her generation, specifically first generation Americans, tend to experience. For example, she's caught in between the traditional ways from her parents and modernity with the American culture. And for Carly, she works through her identity issue by becoming the creator of her own identity and destiny because her parents gave her the gift of being born in the land of the free. And Carly finds that having a strong cultural identity allows her to not conform and get lost in the American way of life, leading her to a mediation between tradition and modernity. Because to choose one way of life over another would be damaging towards her identity and future generations of Americans with Guyanese ancestry.
So I know these characters are based on real people that you interviewed and their stories. Can you give me an idea of who the main three characters are in your book?
There are three Guyanese immigrants who I chose from my research to share their stories because they are representative of the issues that the undocumented Guyanese community faces, such as exploitation and health issues like depression, but also they represent the American values of self-reliance, independence, ingenuity, and fortitude. And the three characters are Veda Prasad from Albion, Guyana, Gabriel Lobes from Hog Island, Guyana, and Jal Sukram from Wakenham, Guyana. And like the people they are based on, these three characters moved to America in the late 1980s to the early 1990s for different reasons, and they each have lived in New York with an undocumented status for more than 15 years. Now for a little background on each character. Beta is a college graduate who is seeking a professional career in the United States because she experiences gender discrimination in her hometown. And also, as a result of the constant race riots in Guyana, Beta's father is violently murdered by racist bigots. Beta and her mother manage to escape the terror, and Beta vows to become her own boss to honor the memory of her father, who raised her to be an independent woman and cherish her education. I also want to add that in the history of Guyana into the present day, it's unfortunate that there are often race conflicts and riots between the two biggest demographics in Guyana, the Indo and Afro-Guyanese. In addition to the conflicts, there is also a corrupt police force who does not bring criminals to justice. And in Veda's story, the police force did not attempt to investigate the murder of her father because, in the eyes of the force, her father was just another dead body. The next character is Gabriel. He is a black market tradesman who works in Guyana's parallel economy, and he struggles to keep afloat after his job becomes increasingly too dangerous during Prime Minister Burnham's initiative to make Guyana a self-sufficient country. And Gabriel follows Asundalar's sketchy instructions, which leads him to landing in JFK Airport with his wife and young daughter. However, Gabriel gets exploited by the FBI, his legal counsel, and then he gets separated from his family. So after getting released into New York by the FBI, Gabriel channeled his depressed feelings from his hardships into his work as a truck driver, and he becomes the first Guyanese man in his peer group to own a truck and to make a decent living. I want to add that Guyana's parallel economy was essentially an underground economy in the 80s where people had to go to other countries, primarily the neighboring countries like Venezuela and Suriname, for basic food items, like flour, because the government of Guyana at the time restricted legal access to foreign exchange because of the goal of making Guyana a self-sufficient country. Okay. And the third character is Jal Sukram, who is a free spirit of the group. And unlike Veda and Gabriel, Jal leaves Guyana because he wants to see the world. He has no attachment to Guyana, no spouse, no child, no career. He takes a dishwashing job on a cruise line, and he works his way up to becoming a waiter. And one day, on a whim, Jal gets off the ship in Miami and enters the United States without the proper documentation. And he finds a job as a tailor in a sweatshop where he is miserable. And he rededicates himself to finding work he loves and becomes a chauffeur to high-end clients.
That's awesome. Can you tell us how these three characters build the plot of the story?
Sure. So Veda, Gabriel, and Jal eventually meet in New York. And these three Guyanese freedom seekers, they face a storm of difficulties together, and they reach deeply into themselves for courage, dedication, valor, and stamina. They discover that their journeys as undocumented immigrants are actually initiations into becoming fully American. And as shadowed earlier, Gabriel and Veda get married and have Carly Lopes, their American daughter, and Carly grows up and acknowledges the sacrifices that her parents made to live in America. She uses the gift of being an American citizen to officially rid herself of her parents' struggles of having to endure gender discrimination, job hazards, race riots, and governmental corruption. And she also goes against the status quo, ridding herself of the generational limitations that were placed on her by others, and creates progressive changes to how she wants to identify.
Depicting Carly and her newfound freedom and getting herself out from these beliefs put on her by others is a very strong statement, because this is something I think every child, regardless of generational status, goes through. Having
Yeah.
to please their mom or their dad, and having the generational trauma stops once one's own identity is actually pursued by the child. So, that being said, what are your hopes for your book?
Oftentimes, American born citizens might not be aware of the value of fundamental rights because they've never been denied them. And for those who are naturalized citizens who might have been denied fundamental rights, now know the value of having them. And I believe that it's important for them to be an advocate and an ally for the undocumented community and not condemn others, especially since the naturalized citizen knows what it might be like to not have fundamental rights. And there's a notion in the United States that the undocumented immigrant should have done it right to come to America, but not everyone has the opportunity to do it right. Some people like Veda didn't have time because she was fleeing danger, or some people don't have the means to do it right because they might not have enough money to support their travels. So that being said, my first hope for the book is for others to realize that undocumented Guyanese individuals in America know the value of freedom because they have been denied those rights that Americans have from the day of birth or naturalization. And since the undocumented Guyanese individual in America embodies the values that I listed before, they're able to remain in America because they know the value of freedom and will try their utmost best to protect it. I also hope that when looking at the characters in this book, one can see that modernity must work in tandem with tradition in order to assist one in coming closer to developing their sense of identity. For Carly Lopes, ridding herself of the struggles that her parents had to endure, such as you owe someone to fall in line, it's one of the ultimate forms of freedom and progression. And the new generations will inevitably use what their parents and their ancestors gifted them to create a new world where they have the freedom to pursue what they want in life.
You state the strive of freedom from expectation, not only from others, but from yourself. Can you give some tips on how to be your most authentic self?
Yeah, I would say in order to stop the generational trauma, you need to be your authentic self and trust the process. Take the risk, just like our ancestors and our parents did when they went to a new unexplored territory.
This is so empowering. Thank you so much for joining us today on Zoom, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Please stay tuned to Giant Steps Press on Facebook and follow Chelsea's book journey with the handle below. Thank you.